Hi, this is Alex from devstories.eu. GeoDjango and PostGIS, episode 14 of 15. Testing spatial applications has a unique catch. Your automated test database needs to install complex sea-level spatial extensions before the very first test even runs. If your automated pipeline is crashing instantly with permission errors, this is likely why. Today, we are looking at testing spatial applications. The first requirement is strictly configuration. When you run tests, Django creates a parallel test database to keep your production data safe. For GeoDjango, this test database must be spatial. This means your database settings must explicitly use a spatial engine, such as the PostGIS backend provided by GeoDjango. You cannot use the standard Postgres backend and just add spatial fields later. The spatial backend is what tells the Django test runner to look for and initialize the required spatial features. Here is the key insight. The standard Django test runner creates a fresh database, runs your migrations, and starts testing. But for a GeoDjango application, creating a fresh database is not enough. The database must also load the PostGIS extension. This is not a standard SQL table, it is a system-level extension. By default, Postgres restricts who can create extensions for security reasons. It usually requires a database user with super user privileges. This is exactly where continuous integration pipelines often fail. You spin up a Postgres container, pass in a standard database user, and tell Django to run tests. Django connects, tries to build the test database, attempts to run the command to create the PostGIS extension, and hits a permission denied error. To fix this in an automated pipeline, the database user executing the tests must have the necessary privileges. The most straightforward approach in an isolated, throwaway environment is to grant the test user super user roles temporarily. If your security policies forbid super user access even in a temporary container, you must configure Postgres SQL so that the specific test user is a trusted owner of the test database and is explicitly allowed to create the PostGIS extension. Once the database is built, GeoDjango needs to know what it's working with. Different versions of PostGIS support different spatial functions. During normal operations, GeoDjango queries the database to determine the installed PostGIS version. However, in a test environment, you can bypass this query by defining a specific setting called PostGIS version. You provide this as a tuple of 3 numbers representing the major, minor, and patch versions. Setting this explicitly can speed up test initialization and acts as a failsafe if the database connection struggles during the initial version check. Running spatial tests is not about writing different assertions, it is primarily an infrastructure challenge. The most critical takeaway is that if your test database user cannot create extensions on the fly, your tests will never even start. Fix your test user privileges to bootstrap PostGIS, and the rest of your pipeline will behave exactly like a standard Django test suite. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me. Until next time, take it easy.